And before we get going, here's a word about our sponsors. SDHQ Motorsports is a powerhouse 30,000 square foot facility with 45 family members reporting for duty. This single owner, single location business is based out of Gilbert, Arizona. It can handle anything from a hot rod, daily driver, pre-runner, race vehicle, half-track or Kugelwagen, or just about any other project you need help with. Their skilled staff with hundreds of years of combined experience eats, sleeps, and breathes performance. So go check them out at sdhqmotorsports.com or check them out on Insta at sdhqmotorsports. The We Happy Few 506 podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Gettysburg Museum of History, home of the Major Dick Winters collection and the largest assortment of authentic Band of Brothers artifacts in the world. Visit the free museum at 219 Baltimore Street in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, or at www.gettysburgmuseumofhistory.com, and on the YouTube channel, The History Underground, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Well, hello, and welcome along to another We Happy Few 506 podcast, The Nearly Men. It's my second podcast of the day, and I got in a bit of a rabbit hole with some of the Band of Brothers guys on a WhatsApp thread before this, so my brain's a bit scrambled. Did you know that the German soccer team Wolfsburg once had a manager called Wolfgang Wolf? Now, someone tells you that just before a podcast, you get sucked down a rabbit hole straight away. Also, I had an incident with my son, which I'll get into when I just do an introduction, because it's pretty funny. So I'm here. I'm joined with beautiful Doug Allen. How you doing, Dougie?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you, Matt. How are you?
Not too bad at all, thank you. And I've got two reprobates with. Do you have fake wood paneling background that's actually? What's that about? Why do you have a fake reclaimed wood background? We have Bob Farmer and Bryan Heim. I got that right because I've pronounced it before. And they are from the Living History Group magazine. How you doing, boys?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, all right. Tell me about the background now. What's going on with your background?
So the wood that you're looking at is actually a photograph of the reassembled wood building in Currahee that was at the museum there. So that's actually a photograph of the wood from one of the training buildings.
Oh, what are the barracks?
Yes.
That's weird. I've just been on a podcast with JD Hewitt from the History Underground, and he was talking about the barrack buildings and how they sold them all off for like $25 each at the end of the war. And some dude bought loads of them and stuffed them in his barn, and they're putting them back up again now.
Yeah, they actually, they have one for sure that's been reconstructed and is on display. And this is a photo of one of the walls that was put together, and we just use it as a background because it's nice and calm.
Yeah, and it's less douchey than having those people that have a library behind them with like Dostoevsky and Tolstoy and stuff, shit they've never read. Do you know what I mean? They just sit there like, "Hi, I'm terribly intelligent."
Well, I'm glad that Bryan sent me this background last minute. Then you didn't see all my books and everything back here. So,
oh yeah. What is on your shelf generally, Bob?
Book on my shelf. I have a lot of. I mean, it started with a lot of air war stuff, but over the last 10, 12 years of digging deep into World War II history, it really stemmed from there. So a lot of air war stuff, a lot of personal stories, a lot of first person books, but your masters of the air and all that, but just I
actually have a very relational wall behind me. I'm wondering if I should turn my background off. I have a hamburger door from a C-47 behind me on the wall, and then I have a cowl flap from a C-47 that's signed by Malarkey and Compton.
Oh man,
wow. Yeah. Well, we'd love to see that.
Here, let me see if I can. Oops, that's
right.
In the meantime, Bob turned his off and he was lying. There's just a cutout model of Admiral Akbar in the background.
Oh, wow. Here we go.
Oh no, there they go. Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I will raise this up.
Oh wow, look at that. You do actually have a door of an aircraft on your wall.
There's a hamburger door, a cowl flap, a parachute cord, a couple of instrument panel pieces, and a fuel cap. And then at the very top right, you can see the jump lights out of the back of a C-47.
Why is it called a hamburger door?
Because it was near the pilot in the front, and if you jumped out of that door, you were going right into the propeller.
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew it was something macabre. I I was like, it's something to do with you just falling and becoming a hamburger meat or something. I knew it was something.
That's
Yep. And
brilliant.
so they call it a hamburger door, or suicide door, or whatever you want to call it. But hamburger door is the common industry term.
It's funny when
Wow.
you really see the proximity of that door to the propeller, you just really wonder what on earth they were thinking in the first place. But
Yeah, that sounds nuts. So what is it used for? Is it used for getting in the aircraft?
It's
Like,
used for getting in and getting out while the aircraft is not running. Yes.
right, okay.
Because what you can
Yeah.
also do is if you throw a cucumber out of it, and then you have a
Yeah.
plate at the end of the plate at the end of the
Down with a salad bowl.
yeah.
Yeah,
Knocks
maybe
all
the
your
tail
cucumber
gunner can have
Yeah.
a salad bowl and
Yeah.
just catch it. Yeah.
Really is his
Right.
night, bit of salt and pepper, absolutely his night up there.
So I'm sure, before you get into it, Matt, I'm sure the first trailer been released just this last week for Masters of the Air? Was that just this last week?
Yep.
yes,
I guess it just before we get on to what we're going to talk about, we must have your views on that because it looked fantastic.
Yeah.
Did everyone see it?
it really does. I read that book. I'm going to revisit now on June 24th. Is it 24th, 26th, 20? I'm going to reread Masters of the Air, and I know I'm sure they went quite a little ways off here and there for it, but I'm excited for it. I really am. I really dug the trailer. I'm going into it personally with trying to look at it from the perspective of a guy who's who's studied the air war and is big in World War II history for the last dozen or so years, but also for the intended audience, which is people who don't know and people who need the education, and get them sparked into wanting to learn more. I don't think the filmmakers made that film to impress us, but I'm sure they will. But I'm hoping that it just inspires people to want to learn more
Well, I think they spent a lot of time on authenticity, and I'm sure there's things that the diehards will look at and the FARB people will point out. But at the end of the day, it is a major Hollywood production. And as long as the message of the story is there and the education portion is there, that's what I'm looking for. And that's, I just recently rewatched The Pacific, and I didn't like it the first time I watched it. But now that I've rewatched it, it definitely is a lot better than I originally thought it was. Obviously, Band of Brothers set the standard for almost everything from back in the day, and I've watched that thousands of times with my older son. But I'm looking forward to Masters of the Air because a lot of what Bob and I do centers around aviation. It centers around the Air Corps. It centers around a lot of B-17 veterans, and so I'm super excited, and I'll be really honest and curious to see what Joe Parrish thinks of it, who is a B-17 pilot veteran that's still with us. So I'm excited.
Pilot.
Out.
Wow. He was a top turret gunner and engineer. Yeah, he's a friend of ours. We've spent a bunch of time with him, interviewed him for the magazine, and he's a 98-year-old guy who is just super healthy and active. And every time I spend time with him, he just has story after story, and just like it happened yesterday. So like Brian said, I'll be really excited to have Joe witness that and see what he thinks of it. It'll be great. Yeah, that'd be great.
Leighton's just put podcast guest. I mean, he is a complete vampire, honestly, straight away. We'll get him. We'll have him.
What did you think of it, Matt?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that. I'll make that happen.
Oh yeah, no, would you? No, that would be great.
Yeah,
that would be really cool. So I had to. So everyone is so excited about this Masters of the Air, and obviously we do this, and we've got this like reach of people, and more people are getting involved. I had to do a live like video to just say, guys, I'm as excited as you are by the Masters of the Air trailer. Please stop sending it to me. I think I got 50 people sending to me. My phone was just like, you have no storage left. Same trailer over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, it looks brilliant. Yeah.
All right, so we'll get into a few things about what you guys do. So I've got a quick fire question round. I'll just go from one to the other. I'll start with Bob.
Yep.
What is living history?
Living history, in the way I describe it, is, you want to tell a story, you want to educate people about World War II, the World War II generation, what they did. So you can pick up a book, which is really important. You can watch a movie, which is really important. You can go and you can see an airplane or go to a museum and see some artifacts, and you can gather some information from that. But living history is walking into history in 3 dimensions. And what I mean by that is, we go to different living history events, and there'll be, encampments set up, and vehicles and aircraft, and folks like Brian and I and a lot of friends and just countless people that we know in, period gear. And kind of being a three-dimensional walking, talking book or photograph that people can interact with a little bit, not necessarily reenacting is a little bit different and very more, much more specific in trying to specifically reenact an event or so on and so forth. But living history to me is just giving the sights and sounds and smells, if you will, of a period of history that you're trying to portray, in our case World War II, and educating people.
So I was in Normandy last year, I think it was last year, and there were these reenactors there, right? And there was this, I'm always getting myself in trouble for saying the wrong thing, and there was this huge guy, huge, must be, he's closing on 7 foot, about 4 foot wide, in like World War II gear, olive drab gear, and it was at a museum we were at, and it was late night. And I think they were encamped around the museum. And he was a weird purple color. And I've never seen a more miserable looking dude in my life. And I was trying to cheer him up. And I was like offering him a hug and stuff. And he kept telling me to piss off. And I think he was going to get violent. And I said to him, what's wrong, mate? What's wrong with you? And he's like, I've been living in a hole in the ground in the rain for a week. How would you feel? And then he walked off. So my first question to you, Bryan, is why do people get into this?
I think the first part that a lot of the people I know get into this is because they really want to help educate people what it's like. And the closest we're going to come to being part of World War II is living history or reenacting, depending on which side you choose. The living history is more of the education portion. It's more of the approach of how you collect and exhibit the items that you have and how you share that with the general public and the people around you, versus the reenactment, which is where the guys that go out and they do the blanks and they do the recreations of the battles and everything. And both of them have the same result, where they give you the experience to be able to express to someone what it could have been like. Now, obviously, we live in 2023 now, so we're not from 1942. But there is an immersion portion of it that is a lot of fun to go back, be around aircraft, which is where we typically are, and be in, my coveralls and my aircraft mechanic impression, Earl, which is the name on my hat, and spend time talking to people. Now, I don't take it to the Hollywood degree where I act in character. I talk to people like normal. Some people do, so you can take it to the extreme. My response to the guy who'd been in the hole for a week would have been like, dude, I get it. I totally understand what you're talking about. I've been in an encampment for over a week where you don't shower, and at the end of the week, you're just like, I'm done. So I get that, but it's also the standard you have to set for yourself when you're around the public. Like, you're around the public, you chose to do that. So if you're not in a good mindset, maybe you should go behind the scenes. Like I would have been put off by that, but for 99% of the time, that's not how people are. And maybe you just caught them in a bad moment.
It can be super annoying. It was most probably definitely me. Don't worry about it.
Well, I mean, I wasn't going to say that, but you went there. So,
yeah.
But so when you're standing there, and it's kind of like obviously a 3-dimensional, experience, the stories you are telling. So you're not so the reenactors are like reenacting a battle or something like that. But what are you doing? Are you actually telling stories of servicemen that you've spoken to, or you?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll do a quick answer, and then I'll let Bob answer too. But for the most part, what we talk about is the instructional portion of World War II. So, for example, if we're around a B-25 bomber, as a mechanic impression, I'm talking to people about how much work had to be done. I'm talking to them about the fact that for every crew member, there were 14 support people that helped make that aircraft fly, that helped with maintenance, that helped with, cleaning everything, changing parts, that, I have a very extensive tool and mechanics display that allows people to see the tools that were used. And there, everything back then was manual. You don't have the computers. So the kids look at it. Of course, my most popular display item is my belts of 50 cal ammunition that, almost every kid gets, eyes the size of a watermelon and is like, what are those? And, it's just explaining what went into the aircraft and then pulling on the talking to the different people. An example is Alan Bell, who was a B-17 pilot.
B-25 pilot.
Sorry, B-25. Flew his bomber on a mission, and on the way back, I think he was trying to evade or he's trying to do something, but basically he flew the plane so low that the tops of the trees were basically getting chopped off by the propellers. And then when you land, you're going to have to tell the mechanic guys like, hey, the marks on the propellers are from trees. So now you're going to have to look at the propellers and make sure that they actually are going to do what they do. So as a mechanic for a display, I can talk to people about, see these propellers, they have to be in perfect shape in order for this aircraft to fly. And it just, everything works into a story. And I think Bob has the same type of answer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you can watch a movie, you can pick up a book, you can learn a lot from those different sorts of media. But when somebody has come to a public event and they walk up to your encampment, and some events are small, there might be a half a dozen tents there. We've gone to some where there are hundreds and hundreds, and there are thousands of reenactors. But you get public that come up to you and they're interested. They're there and they paid money to get in the door because they want to learn. They want to see the cool things and, oh wow, a Jeep, a World War II Jeep and an airplane. But they come walking through your encampment and they see the things that you've collected and that you've learned about and you want to share. And one, it's, as Bryan is explaining, like it's a matter of just explaining maybe how things work, how the technology at the time works. This was a can opener, or simple things like that, or this is, what the 50 caliber rounds look like, and so on and so forth. But where Bryan and I have a kind of a unique perspective is because of the work that we've done with the magazine and all the veterans we've interviewed. We have quite a number of stories that we can put with a lot of those pieces and components,
And
I definitely want to talk about the magazine.
Yeah, is this the mission report? Yes,
Living
mission
History
report.
Group.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, the book, Bryan. Yeah.
Mission Report is a book that we recently put out that's a compilation of veteran interviews, but the magazine itself has one interview each issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, and I definitely want to talk about the magazine, but I just have two questions. I'll roll them into one, and you can both answer them at once. How expensive is it to do living history, and how many marriages survive it?
It's not booze or women. It's my wife, and I know Bryan's as well, is just incredibly supportive. I mean, if you want to go and spend money and be gone for a weekend or a week, I mean, we missed Easter once. We covered the 75th anniversary of the Doolittle raid in Dayton, Ohio, and it was over Easter weekend, and that was, I promise you, that was not an easy decision, but it was an incredible once in a lifetime event. And, we're going to go there and we're going to meet some veterans and we're going to interview these veterans. And, Bryan and I have both interviewed World War II veterans whose stories are maybe pretty well known or have been shared in other publications or whatnot. But we go to a lot of these events and there are veterans that just hear about them and their sons or daughters or grandkids bring them, and they've never told their story publicly. And so it's a pretty special thing where, it costs money. We've never made money doing this, I'll tell you that.
It's quite going back. So each magazine has a story in it, and the mission report is a compilation of those stories. I just wondered, because you mentioned Alan Bell.
Yeah.
Yes.
Funny. I just read his little story there, and what was interesting about that is that he was flying missions in a B-25. In broad daylight, and the mission ceiling would sometimes be between 200 and 500 feet.
Correct. That was the tree story I was talking about. Yeah.
Which is what you said, taking the tops of trees off. I mean, that must have been terrifying. So he's saying he just had to fly below the cloud level, whatever that level may have been. You've got to fly below it, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I can do a long answer or a short answer, but when it comes to the cost, I am actually fortunate in some of that part of my career is an aviation photographer. So a lot of the events I used to go to, I was paid to go to. And I still do that not as much since COVID because a lot of things have changed. But the thing that happened for me as a photographer is I would sit there and have downtime, and these veterans would be sitting around and nobody was talking to them. Like, they'd be sitting there by themselves and nobody was talking to them. And so I started to take notice of what was going on. And at the time I had a magazine partner, Christopher Miller. And he and I were like, we really need to share these stories. Like, we really need to share these. And fortunately at that time, the money was there, but now it's more of a passion, and it's a budgeting situation. But in the end of the day, it's really not that expensive, because you're going to spend your money to go to a football game, or you're going to spend your money to go to a hockey game or whatever.
Brian, your wife's not listening, man. You can tell the truth. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I mean, look, for me, I live in Oregon on the West Coast. So the East Coast events cost me about $3,000 for each event that I go to. So there is a cost. She does bulk at that sometimes, but not always. But at the end of the day, it's worth it. And Bob and I are definitely not pulling in the riches with the magazine and the books that we do. But I think the reward to us is sharing the stories of the veterans, sharing the stories of the people we talk to. And we really try to focus on unique stories. We have had the honor of participating since 2012 in some pretty significant U.S. historical events. The Doolittle Raiders reunion in 2012, the Memphis Belle dedication with the U.S. Air Force Museum, a second Doolittle Raiders reunion, Thunder over Michigan with the Corsair gathering, and then World War II weekend this last year. And it kind of is to the point now where I don't know that Bob and I seek things out. We do, but a lot of people seek us out now because they end up finding out that we're on site. They have a veteran relative. They have a story that they feel isn't told, because everybody pretty much knows the story of Band of Brothers, but how many people know the story of Joe Parrish? How many people know the story of Alan Bell? How many people know the story of the guys that are there? And obviously there were hundreds of thousands of people. So that's really what we try to do. And the only complaint we ever get is we don't publish enough, but it's done in our free time. So we average 2 issues a year. So it's not, it's not as much as we would like, but it's what we can do, and it's what we can still keep doing. And we still get people that buy the magazines. All of a sudden I'll get an email that someone bought our magazine from 2014, about the airborne that we did for the D-Day invasion. And it's awesome because someone's learning that story. And then the other thing we decided was, what do we do with these veteran interviews? Like, we don't want to just one-shot them all and then just let them sit. So that's when the mission report kind of came up, and we decided that we were going to do a series of books called Mission Report, and we published book 1. Book 2 is in the works right now. Unfortunately, most of these guys have passed away. So really the only way they're going to get shared with what they've done or what they did do is through what we're trying to do. And the families are very supportive. We are very careful in what we do. We try to make sure that we tread on the side of honoring those veterans and the people that have served. And because of that, people have given us access and photographs and things that we like to share. We've actually talked about maybe doing a book that is just solely World War II photographs that all these veterans have shared, because between the two of us, we probably have 1,000 photographs from different veterans, from Pearl Harbor to the Flying Tigers to Band of Brothers with Bill Wingate to, guys that people didn't even know. So it is expensive, I guess, per se, but it's about choice. And I choose to do this versus things that other people might choose. I don't own a boat, so that helps because I can put the money towards this. And I have a passion for aircraft. That's also my day job for clients. So we're really lucky. And I was able to convince Bob a number of years ago to jump on the ship when he was like, "You're crazy. Why would I do this?"
So
I don't think it took much. I don't think it took much.
No.
How did the magazine start?
It really started from what I was just saying. Like, I was at events and there's all these people that have these stories, and I would sit down and talk to these veterans, and I'm like, this needs to be recorded. Like, we should record this. And so originally I had a YouTube channel that had the videos on it through Flightline Fabrications, which is a company that I own, and we did a living history project where we interviewed the veterans, put the videos up there. I think they're still up there. There's one with Alter Wiener, who was a Holocaust survivor, Art Iwasaki, who was a Japanese World War II veteran. And it started there. And then my friend Christopher and I were like, well, so I'm an aviation photography. I do living history photography quite extensively. And we take all these tens of thousands of photographs at events. And how can we share that with people around us? And so we just started to kind of map out a 12-issue magazine that originally started as only 20 pages and now has grown to 64 pages per issue, sometimes 44, depending on the subject. And, we've been fortunate to garner that with events. And then as we moved forward, we're like, okay, instead of just making up the subjects that we want to do from time to time, let's theme it to the events that are going on. Let's do the 2012 Doolittle Raider event, and let's interview the Doolittle Raiders, and let's talk to veterans there. And fortunate to have an extremely close relationship with Dick Cole, who was Doolittle's co-pilot on the Doolittle raid. And I spent 11 events with him, which was phenomenal during his 103 years of life. And he was the one that was kind of like, he's like, everybody hears about me and I love talking about what I did, but he's like, there's all the other guys that nobody talks about. And that was really what kind of kicked it into full gear of let's, and we say unique stories because that's what we try to do. And that's really where it kicked it in. And then Christopher ended up moving. He ended up doing some other things in his life. So he stepped down, and Bob and I had become friends, and he's very passionate about World War II. So I reached out to him and said, hey, would you want to do this? And, we're going to go spend a weekend around airplanes all weekend. Would you want to do that? And I think he was like, yeah, it was horrible. So that's kind of how the magazine started. And then as we've evolved, it's become more centered on the veterans and more centered on their stories and more centered on the things that they do. There's still the historical portion of it that talks about the different things that happened within the years of the war, but we've really tried to focus more on veterans, especially the fact that they're becoming less and less every day.
Yeah, we have maybe 3 to 5 years of finding these guys and getting their stories out of them. I mean, that's, if we're lucky, there may be a couple of 100,000 World War II veterans left, I think they say is the number now. And it's like you feel a responsibility once you get into that and you start interviewing veterans and you find these stories and you find how much some of these guys who didn't talk for decades and decades are willing to now tell their stories. You feel a responsibility to record those stories and share them. I was working my day job up in New Hampshire a couple years ago, 2 years ago maybe, and I got on Facebook Marketplace. I'm always looking for World War II stuff that people are selling, go buy a blanket or something, right? And I see an ad for birdhouses, little woodworking stuff being built and sold by a World War II veteran, like 35, 40 minutes from where I was. So I sent a message, and it turns out it was this World War II veteran's neighbor that was trying to help him sell birdhouses that he was building. He was selling birdhouses to make money to take his wife out for their 75th anniversary. Like, no kidding. This is the story. So I sent her a message and I said, I'll come buy a birdhouse, but I want to meet him. I appreciate that you're selling for him. Long story short, I go and I meet this fella named Ed Gagne, and he served in the Navy in World War II. And he took me into his wood shop. He was just, once he knew that I had some knowledge of World War II and I was asking questions that made sense to him, a younger person asking questions and expressing not only an interest, but a passion for wanting to share those stories, he started opening up to me. And I ended up spending about 3.5 or 4 hours at this guy's house that night. And I took my recorder with me, and he told me practically his whole World War II story in the Navy as best he could, with his family sitting around. And by the end of the night, he himself had tears in his eyes. And there were family members and friends that just happened to be there that also did, because they had never even heard him tell some of these stories. So when something like that happens, like, I get goosebumps now thinking about it. You really feel like, well, not only we're doing something special, but we're doing something that we need to be doing. We need to do it right now while these guys are here. So,
well, and we're in our own small little world, obviously, but the best part for us is when we hear the families say, I never knew that. I never heard that. I've never heard this story. He's never shared that. Like, for some reason, and Bob's way better than I am. I'm better at the photography. He's better at the interviews. Bob just speaks to people in a respectful way that they feel calm and they like to open up and they like to talk about stories. And look, a lot of these guys came home, they put it behind them, they went back to work, they went to life, they didn't talk about it. My grandfather didn't talk about World War II a single day in his life, and he never would, even though I asked. So it's really awesome when we do that. And I think we're up to almost 80 veterans now since 2012 that we've interviewed. Either on the phone or in person or at events. And I would say 75% of those are people that say, we never knew that. He hasn't ever told us this story. And in fact, we had one veteran, Bob, at the museum, Tommy, the B-25. Tommy Bristol, had a family member with him. And we ended up interviewing him on the spot. And the story he told, whoever the guy that was with him, he's like, I've heard a lot of stories, but I've never heard this one. And so it's just amazing. And we just want to share that.
Funny enough, it's another one I've written down. Based in India, he's a tail gunner.
Yeah.
Tommy Bristol. And he flew 54 missions. I thought there was a cap for how many missions.
There was a cap, but he kept going. He did not want to go home. And if you ever met him, you would know why. He bleeds red, white, and blue, East Coast.
So
he re-enlisted, did he? So he did his 25, came back and did another 25, or was it?
He said, "I'm just staying. Yeah, I'll just sign my name again."
Yeah, he just stayed.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
he was something. Yeah, he was something else. That guy. And what's interesting about that, so that was at the 75th anniversary of the Doolittle Raid events out in Dayton. And were there 11 B-25s that came in for that one, Brian?
Well,
we had 11 or 12 B-25 Mitchells that came in for that. So when you get those guys that maybe even haven't seen one of those planes in 60, 70 years, and you get them around them, man, it's like it was yesterday. And he crawled up in, you see the pictures there that Brian took, he crawled up in the tail gunner seat of that plane like he had done it the day before.
Yeah.
And he was 93, 92 at the time. Yeah.
Kavanaugh, that owns that plane, basically told him, do whatever you want to do. Like, other than start the airplane, there's nothing you can't do. Like, if you want to do it, get in. And he did.
Yeah.
Some of those stories are amazing. There's another one I jotted down with Staff Sergeant Lewis Waters, who was a tail gunner. He gets shot down. Well, the plane was damaged, crash landed. He was in the tail, and there's a photo in the story. It's fantastic. It's in this mission report book of the plane basically on fire, broken in two.
Yep.
But in East Austria that was owned by the Russians at the time, and the Hungarians spent a month rebuilding the aircraft for them to fly out. So he had to stay there. The whole crew stayed there. And then they have a photo of the aircraft. It's really fascinating because the back part of the fuselage is a completely different color because they had to scrap parts together and find to fly this thing. I mean, it's just an amazing story, that alone. I mean, that's a movie right there, right?
Yeah.
Could be. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something when you go to these events and that guy's just there. And you walk down the street and, that's just a 93, 94-year-old, 95, today, 97, 98-year-old guy. But you see these guys with their hats on, and you see them looking at these planes, and like Brian said, you can't help but go up. Like we're hooked now. We have to go up and start asking questions and talking to these guys. And Lou, actually, it was that day he went up in the B-17 with the Yankee Air Museum. He went flying that day that we interviewed him. Yeah.
Do you find him?
Yeah, he was a kick in the pants.
Do you know the author Andy Biggio that wrote the rifle?
I don't.
I know that one. No, I will.
You will.
Because if you tell Bob a book that he doesn't know, he'll find it.
Okay, so we had him on the rifle. He's just written another one as well. It's great, but we had him on, and he was saying that he would do the same thing. Like he would go and buy a bird box, the equivalent of. I hope we bought several, by the way, bird boxes. But he would speak to World War II veterans, and he would put this rifle that he has all these signatures on. He'd put them in their hands.
I've seen that.
And
Yeah.
suddenly they would, you know what I mean? Suddenly they're not frail old men anymore. Suddenly it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're right back in it. Do you find that when you get the veterans around the aircraft,
100%.
suddenly they're just
Absolutely.
infused
100%.
with
I
life?
saw Joe Parrish. Well, though, like the first time
Absolutely.
I met Joe, we've known Joe 4 or 5 years now, and he was 93 at the time. And he walked up to the hatch underneath the cockpit where the B-7 or the 20-year-old guys were grabbing and just pulling themselves up. And wouldn't you know, he jumped up there and he tried to grab that thing like he was going to pull himself up in the hatch of that plane from the ground. I mean, it's amazing to watch a 95 or older year-old guy just become 19 again.
And
it's something.
In part of that, one thing that Bob and I seem to really enjoy is because we've been doing this for a while, we're able to sit and identify people who are potentially that veteran. And it typically starts where they're a few hundred yards out from the aircraft. They're kind of walking around. You can see that there's something more than just an aircraft in front of them. Like you can see it. Obviously, you can see their age. They start to move a little bit closer. And then maybe the family member that's with them finally convinces them to go up, and either they'll ask to touch it or they'll ask something. And you can see that transformation where they go from 98 years old to 18 or 19 years old. And wasn't it Lou who even cut his leg getting in and out of the
that was Alan.
That was a veteran.
Alan. That was Alan. Yeah.
Alan was he was in a wheelchair and he was so determined to get into that plane. He literally had lacerations on his legs when he climbed out, and he did not care. He
chuckled about it when we were interviewing him.
He didn't want attention. He cared more about that plane than the lacerations on his legs. Of course, his wife was a little concerned, but I mean, we took care of it. It was taken care of. But that's what you see, and you see it. You see that, Matthew. You see that transformation all the time where they're a little bit skeptical. Obviously, there's memories that they're going through and processing, but as soon as they touch it or go to that, it's almost like you explain that kind of shake, and then all of a sudden they're 17 again. And I feel like this happens with almost every veteran that we've interviewed. Even when we just interview them, all of a sudden they step back in time. And this is, I think, part of why some of the families have said we've never heard those stories, because A, maybe it's a memory recall, B, they didn't want to share it. But as soon as we get them into that comfort zone where they step back in time, they're like, oh yeah, this happened. And so it's a phenomenal thing, but it does happen that way. It really does.
So going back to your point of it being very important to try and get as many of these veterans interviewed as you can and get them in that situation. I remember John Orloff, who wrote a couple of episodes of Band of Brothers, talking, and he says in his mind, there's no doubt that Band of Brothers coming out and the involvement that the veterans then had kept these guys alive for another 10, 15 years.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I would agree with that.
Yeah. It's a pretty profound thing to say. And so it sort of gives your mission severe gravitas. So, I can circle back to what I was saying. And, I'm sorry, wives, but there's not an amount of money here. This is not about money.
No.
An expense.
No. Yeah, and I would agree with that 100%. I feel like us interviewing some of the veterans we've interviewed gives them a little bit more life. It gives them a little more hope. It gives them a little bit of light that someone cares about what they did and what happened. And, and honestly, that comes from, interviewing all kinds of veterans, but even some of the guys that are at the top of the list with, Wingate and Cole, and it just, even for them, I mean, I don't think Dick Cole would have lived to be 103 if the Dulo Raiders hadn't gotten the attention that they got to help him continue that story. And he was very driven with that story. So I think that's absolutely true.
Fascinating. So tell us about your involvement with the Memphis Belle and Catherine Weiler. and your interested thereof, and your article that you wrote about Memphis Belle. We spoke off air, by the way, listeners, about how terrified, on a level of 1 to 10, how terrified we are of Catherine Weiler.
So it was the second or third of what's that?
I'll say, can I start the story with the Memphis
Sure.
Belle event, and then you
go
can
ahead.
transition for Catherine?
Absolutely.
So we've been doing events now for over 10 years, and the people in Dayton know us extremely well. And so a woman by the name of Betsy Bayshore, sorry, reached out to us and said, hey, the Memphis Belle's being presented at the Air Force Museum. We're looking for 10 people to participate in that unveiling who are of the utmost squared away, understand history, willing to be part of it. We understand you guys. We know you guys. You've been around us for like 6 years now. And I said, I guarantee you I can get 10 guys to come out there within a day. And we didn't know what was going to happen, just that we were going to be part of the unveiling, that they needed basically living historians to portray ground crew, to be part of the event. At the same time, B-17 fly-in Urbana, as well as an encampment at the museum. So there were just a lot of pieces that were really exciting. And so first I reached out to Bob, and of course he instantly said yes. And then I reached out to some guys from here in Oregon. There were 5 of us total. And then some people we know in Urbana, and we got back to Betsy and said, look, we have 10 guys, we'll be there the day before. And so things were kind of quiet. And then about a week later, we got a phone call from Jeff Duford at the Air Force Museum, who at the time was the curator responsible for the restoration of the Memphis Belle. And he was just kind of trying to field out, I think, what type of people we were. Like, were we interested in history? Were we interested in the limelight? Like, where were we? And once he convinced that, he said, okay, you guys are good to go. You're going to be part of the presentation team that unveils the Memphis Belle. You're going to be part of the events. Are you guys free during that? And we, Bob and I have learned that when we go to these events, you leave your time open because things just seem to happen for us. And we get there, they ran us through a dry run. Basically, it was our responsibility to gather up the curtain that dropped when they presented the B-17, move it out of position, and then essentially be there as living historians to help talk to people about the history. Obviously, there were a lot of VIPs there. There were veterans there. I'm going
to interject real quick. This was a private unveiling the night before the public unveiling. This was like an invite only kind of thing that, the public unveiling happened the next day, but this was a sort of a wine and cheese and military dignitary kind of a thing. Yeah.
And all of the Belle crew families were there. Morgan's wife was there. There were generals with more brass than I've ever seen in my life. There were, it was pretty high end, and we were very honored to be part of it. And that kind of let us in. And then from there, it was like, hey, we're doing these events in Urbana. So we ended up being around the 17s. And then they said, oh, well, we're doing a screening of the new Memphis Belle documentary in the theater. You guys want to come to that? So we got invited to that. And it ended up being a fantastic weekend. We met, I don't remember the general that's in charge of the museum, but they took us into like a small conference room, and we met the general that is responsible, or at the time, for the whole museum, and took a photo with them, and he thanked us for everything we did. And then, everybody was looking forward to the screening, and we were all looking forward to the screening. And at that point, none of us knew Catherine. So it was it was a little bit of awe, kind of like you're saying, like we were kind of like, oh, there's Catherine. That's William Wyler's daughter. And of course, we're all fans of William Wyler because he's the one that did the Memphis Belle documentary in World War II. So as historians, you know about that. And we ended up going to the screening, and then I think Bob, and this is where I'll transition to you, Bob was like, I want to meet her. He's like, I want to talk to her. I want to interview her. Like, I want to talk to her. And we knew that she had directed part of the 89 film as well. So, we knew who she was. She wasn't just a person in the crowd. We knew who Catherine Weiler was. We just didn't know her like we do now. And so I told Bob, I'm like, go for it. And we were in the lobby of the theater. And there's even a photo, I think, in the magazine of Bob that very first time you talked to her. And so I'll let you take the story from there. But I was, again, I'm better at a photographer, so I was taking the pictures and he was doing the talking.
So yeah, I mean, when the Memphis Belle unveiling happened, like Brian said, we didn't know Catherine. We weren't a part of any of the Cold Blue, any of that. We weren't involved in that whatsoever. So we were invited to the first screening of the Cold Blue and the restored Memphis Belle, and Catherine Weiler and the director Eric Nelson, who did the Cold Blue, they were there, and they had a great Q&A. I mean, it was really informative. It was great. One or two of the veterans that are actually in the Cold Blue were there at the theater with us as well. In fact, I can't remember his name, but the gentleman who sings, if you watched the Cold Blue at the end, after the screening, we went out in the hallway and he sang that song to us. But yeah, as Brian said, having been such of, the original Memphis Belle film, we all knew it. And that being such a huge part of film history, World War II cinematic history, and then Catherine having been co-producer on the 1990 film, as Brian said, when I saw her, I'm like, I'm going to go introduce myself and get a card or something and see if I can. We knew we were going to put together a magazine issue about the entire event that week there. And I'm like, it would be really cool if I could get Catherine Weiler, to interview with me. So I did, and she was awesome, even though I'm sure I was shaking like a leaf, thinking that I'm talking to somebody that I probably shouldn't be talking to, but they just let me walk right up to her in the lobby. But she was great. So it's probably 3 or 4 weeks later, I was able to coordinate a telephone interview with her because she lives down in DC. I'm in Pittsburgh. It was about 5 hours away. So I just interviewed her on the phone, and it was great. I mean, really candid, had a lot of, really cool stories and insight about her dad and the original Memphis Belle. But then some really great stories of the filming of the 1990 film, so it was really neat. And we did that interview and put the magazine out, a few months later. And then it was actually, I think it was almost a year later that the Cold Blue was finally released in theaters for like one day here. They released it, they played it for one day. And that's a whole other funny story that I can tell you, that we'll get to maybe. But so the Cold Blue was getting, a pretty good bit of attention, and it was fantastic. I mean, Eric Nelson did a spectacular job on it. But even though the Memphis Belle itself had been restored in 4K, it wasn't getting the same sort of attention. So that's when I had kept in communication with Catherine, got her some copies of the magazine, that sort of thing. And I said, well, what if I tried to put together a screening just of your dad's, the restored Memphis Belle film here in Pittsburgh at the big Carnegie Science Center, big IMAX theater? I'm like, could we make something like that happen? And she says, absolutely, that'd be great. So it was Veterans Day weekend of 19, Brian, right before COVID. Veterans Day weekend of 19, we flew Catherine up here from DC, and we spent the weekend. We actually screened it 3 times that weekend. Friday night, Catherine was the special guest and watched it with us and did a Q&A with the people that showed up. And then the other 2 screenings, we had a couple of World War II veterans, B-17 guys, show up. And after we screened the film, we kind of interviewed them. So it went from there. And then we had plans to do some more screenings in 2020. And obviously COVID came and that didn't happen. But we were finally able last year to get the ball rolling again, and we did one down in Memphis that was great, and actually we're working on 1 or 2 possibilities for this upcoming again. So that's what we and Catherine and becoming involved with, trying to spread the word about our dad.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why was it only released for one day?
Pardon?
Why was it only released for one day?
I don't know. That I couldn't tell you. I know they played it in theaters. I mean, I remember when it was advertised. Like, I mean, friends of mine that live near here, we decided there were only certain theaters they were showing it to. Like, oh, we're all going to meet. We're going to go to this theater to see it. And I mean, I remember it being packed. Like, you had to buy tickets ahead of time, and it was packed. But I don't know exactly why. From a film company production standpoint, how that works. I don't know. And then it took, I don't know, it was probably 6 months, or I don't know how much how long after that it was finally released on Blu-ray and DVD. But I don't know why it only played in theaters the one day. That I can't speak to.
Yeah, I think it's got something to do with like the amount of screens that you show a film is then indexes how much the film is costs when you then sell it on. So if it goes onto a platform like Netflix or something, if it's shown at so many theaters or a certain number of screens, it can command a different price. I think it's a business thing. Yeah, it's a business thing to do with platforms, probably. Yeah.
So, but
Catherine Weiler have something to do with that, because that seems like the sort of crafty thing she would do.
No, actually, I don't know that she would. The Cold Blue, I mean, was Vulcan Productions, and Eric directed it. I think Catherine had a bit of a fingerprint on, or a thumbprint on it, but I don't know that. You'd have to ask her how much how involved she was with that part of it.
Yeah, we did speak to her about it. She wasn't that involved particularly in all that. It's all the sort of restoration of it and everything as well. She was just fascinated by it.
I think Eric originally reached out to her to ask if she would support him rebuilding her father's documentary.
Yeah.
Well, what it was originally was that Eric was wanting to make this documentary about the air war, and he was looking for actual wartime footage of B-17s flying and bomber crews and whatnot. And the only thing, the best shot he had was he learned that Weiler's original 16 millimeter footage was all still in the National Archives in storage. So he reached out to Catherine to get the blessing from the Weiler family to get that footage out and restore it and use it for his documentary. And Catherine's caveat was, well, that'd be great, but my dad's original film is in horrible condition. At that point, every copy that you've seen was a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy from 50 years prior. And it was, a lot of respects, practically unwatchable. It was in such poor condition. So she said, I'd love for you to restore my dad's film. And I think she said it was only a number of months later, 3 or 4 months later, Eric got right back to her and said, yeah, that's done, frame for frame, all 4K restored. So he did that before completing the Cold Blue. He restored the Memphis Belle for her and the Weiler family. Yeah.
Well, and it's also about being in the right place at the right time, because with all this happening and with Bob meeting her, that's when she said, I'd really like to work with someone to keep my father's film moving forward and try to get more recognition. And that's kind of where the screenings that Bob and I do developed with Catherine and Eric initially, although Eric has stepped aside for other projects. And so, we've been extremely fortunate to build that relationship with Catherine, and then obviously promote the documentary as well as the Cold Blue. And I think we have a couple that we're in the works for 24 that we're going to be looking at presenting. And it just, Catherine is definitely a very passionate person about everything she does, and she's passionate about her father's work. And we all know that World War II history is not taught as much as it used to be, and it's almost passed over by a lot of educational programs. So she reached out to us, and I have to give props to Bob, because he took the leash and kind of ran, saying, I'm going to make this happen. And he's put all of it together, and I'm very honored to be part of it and to help MC and be part of those events. But you know that Masters of the Air is going to change all of that. It's going to be part of popular culture, and I think the resurgence of all the work that you guys have done collecting these incredible stories. Everyone should read it, because just look at it, it's really great. You have a few little photos and just a kind of an anecdotal story of whatever, whether they're a tail gunner or ground crew or whatever, or or a pilot. And they're just amazing stories. And I think, Masters of the Air is going to do what Band of Brothers did, it will. It'll give you, it will give a resurgence. Yeah.
Well, let's hope so. Just so that torch can continue to be carried and those stories continue to be carried, especially now when it's like I said, we have a couple of years of getting younger people in the same room and shaking those hands and having that tangible connection, not just to an airplane or a rifle or a tank, but these guys are still here. This isn't something that happened in ancient history, so
There's
but
also something from Catherine Wilder's father's film, but just there's something incredibly beautiful about those machines, and
yeah,
particularly the way they're filmed against the
yeah,
blue sky with the
yeah.
the stream coming out of them, the white stream. They're just incredibly beautiful machines as well. So I think just aesthetically, it's a sort of to get that back into the public consciousness, and it's like you see these incredibly beautiful machines, and then it's like, yeah, but this is what happened. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
I think it's an
I think
easy
that's
sell.
why. I'm sorry.
I was just saying,
I think
I think it's an easy sell.
that's really a big part of once we started to get to know Catherine and we started planning having these screenings, putting together some history on her father and how the original film even came to be.
Yeah.
And how important Weiler was in documenting, and there were other, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen, and all about Five Came Back, but these filmmakers at the time that, filmmaking was practically still in its infancy in a way, but aviation was certainly still in its infancy. I mean, the B-17, the Model 299, which is a prototype, flew in 1935, 32 years after the Wright brothers flew. But for these guys, these filmmakers, to take it upon themselves to, unnecessarily for them, for monetary reasons or whatever it may be, to go ahead and just jump into harm's way. What Weiler did to create this film is just unbelievable. He was a guy that's like our age, in his 40s, with a young family. And he's like, you know what, I'm going to figure out how to get into the military, and I'm going to go fly missions in a bomber, because, I mean, he was a bit of a daredevil, as Catherine will certainly explain, but he just knew that it needed to be done, or that he had a gift for filmmaking, and he knew that there was something that he could share with people. That I think he had the insight that it wasn't just for propaganda purposes at the time. I think he knew that people years down the line would need to know, and how he and his crew did it was just remarkable. And again, that's why, like, the presentation that we put on before these screenings and educating people about Weiler, I think that's why it's so important, just to, when you understand why he felt he needed to do it, or why any of these guys felt they needed to do it, it makes it even that much more special that we get to sit and watch it today in 4K and it's all restored. Like, it's incredible.
I think that's the really important point that you made there, was that it wasn't for propaganda, and it doesn't look like propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it was supposed to be. He was doing,
but there was a lot of American filmmakers that did that, that I think that were drafted in to make propaganda, that didn't make propaganda. They just made incredibly well shot, like obviously historically accurate, but accurate documentaries of what were going on.
Yeah.
Well, I think the best part of the accuracy is that's not as much as a Hollywood film as it is. It's not. I mean, he flew 5 combat missions. They lost a photographer during those missions. Like, they did that. That wasn't on a set. It wasn't, they flew those missions. And Catherine will say, and I'll echo what Bob said, she said to us a number of times that her father, in years afterwards, told her he just knew he had to make it. Like, he knew he had to make it happen, and it had to be real. And so the only way to do that was to immerse themselves as air crew on the missions, take that risk. And I think if you look at it, not necessarily our younger generations, but the generations that are older, understand that they took those risks and they really did that. That is not CGI, and it's not Hollywood.
No. Yeah, there was a cameraman, a guy named Harold Tannenbaum. He was one of the cinematographers that went with Weiler. And he was in a B-17, not the Memphis Belle, shooting some other shots from outside the Belle or whatnot. And his B-17 was shot down. He was killed. He was actually a World War I veteran. He served during World War I, and he was a cinematographer for Weiler, and he was one of the crew, and he was killed during the filming of that documentary. Like, that was no joke. Yeah.
Well, listen, boys, I'm going to round out now because we've had you for an hour. You've been great, by the way. I feel like you two were separated at birth as well. I don't know why. Symbiotic characters. I've just got one question for you. I usually end with this nearly question, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to end with a different question I thought of. And you take it first, Bob, and you take it second, Brian. Were you drafted into the Air Force during World War II and you were to serve on a bomber, which member of crew would you be? You're a tail gunner, bomber, Bob. I'm sorry. I'm going to interject straight away. You're a turret gunner or a tail gunner straight away.
I'll say turret gunner. Sure. Yeah.
Brian,
I see that. I'll take that judgment.
Told you I was annoying.
I would probably have gone with navigator because I kind of want to make sure we always got there and got home. Like that would probably be. I mean, everybody would say pilot, but I think realistically, probably navigator.
Right. So the other
I might have to switch my answer to radio operator because I do like to hear myself talk. Maybe
you're in the turret, Bob. Now get back in the turret. I also had this image of is it Alan Bell, the guy that got the trees right? I just had him coming back and trying to explain to the ground crew that the trees are 500 foot tall over that particular section. I promise you, 500 foot tall. You should see these things.
They jumped. They were big.
We're lucky we made it back. Yeah.
All right, boys. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We'll let you go now, and then
thanks a bunch, Matt. Yeah, it was great chatting, guys. Thank you so much.
It was a really great chat. We won't have you back on again because I think we got about 10 everything you'd talk about, which would be great.
Yeah,
in a couple of months' time. That would be great.
Yeah, we'll wear different shirts and we'll have a different background. That'd be great.
Yeah, good. You have a Hooters background and I don't know. All right, boys. Thank you so much for coming on. Bob and Bryan, thank you very much. Cheers, boys. All right. Well, that was a very enjoyable podcast. And this is sort of clipped onto the end edited bit because we all just jumped off. I didn't round it out and I didn't say thank you very much, everybody, for listening. I've got a couple of Patreons and new subscribers that I'd like to say thank you to. We have one called Svenja, which is a great name. Thank you very much for subscribing. Shelby Copeland and Paul Ryan are all new patrons to our Patreon. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate the support. And the more guys that we can get to do this, the longer we can do this for. And hopefully, pretty soon you will be able to now have access to. I just recorded right before this pod a podcast with JD Hewitt, and he and I talk about the Battle of Verdun from different aspects and things. That was really good, really cool. You know, JD Hewitt's cool as anything. It was a really good chat we had with him, but that will be for Patreons only. So if you're not a Patreon and you want that, you best go subscribe. All right. Thanks very much. And I will be back next week.